Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics, and in this video I like to discuss the way that accusations of Cummings leaking the Dyson text last week that I sort of doubted in the last video has taken off to form another political storm. Not far off a year after the Barnard Castle affair thrust Cummings into the spotlight then. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So I said last week that I wasn't too sure that Cummings would have been responsible for the Dyson text leaks, because that revelation would only outrage those already outraged at Johnson's behaviour, whatever their usual political alignment. Dominic Cummings, for example, a former Conservative minister, has described Boris Johnson famously as a vacuum of integrity. If Cummings wanted to do some extra damage to Johnson, why this and why now? At this moment in time, the revelation was never going to seriously hurt Johnson, and surely Cummings would know that. I argued that he would either have used something more explosive, and I'd have little doubt he's got lots of evidence tucked away should he need it, or he'd have waited until Johnson's support was wavering. And with more recent events, I think that is still my view. Because since the accusations against Cummings from within Johnson's inner circle, the Barnard Castle eye tester has written a savage blog against Johnson's handling of the pandemic last year, and it's only taken off from there. The way I'd read this now is that someone else released those texts at the end of the day. Maybe Johnson's team genuinely thought it was Cummings who did so and publicly blamed him for it. It sort of makes sense, you know. Dominic Cummings did lose a power struggle at the end of last year. He is a spiteful person. Naturally, he'd blame Boris Johnson. He certainly has the evidence to do all of this. And he does leak. He leaks like a sieve. But obviously preferring to be hung as a wolf than a sheep, Cummings has lashed out with some really savage revelations. Though nothing verifiably true as yet. Let's not get carried away with details right now. Both Johnson and Cummings are liars, complete charlatans. But the point is that what we now seem to have is a genuine scrap between Cummings and Johnson, which would sort of nullify the notion I was also mulling over as to whether this text scandal might actually have been cooked up in conjunction with Cummings. That now seems to be unlikely. So now some are thinking that Michael Gove is the actual source of the leak. Now that's quite interesting. Michael Gove has had ambitions to be Prime Minister for some time. I'm sure it can't be doing his ego any good to see Boris Johnson in that role when Johnson is a fool. You know, when Gove failed in 2019, Johnson made him Cabinet Minister without a specific role. But for much of the last year, Gove took charge of the Northern Ireland Protocol preparations. But more recently, Johnson took that role away from him and gave it to unelected bureaucrat David Frost. You know, the guy who spends most of his time arguing against the two Brexit deals he helped negotiate, the withdrawal agreement and the trading cooperation agreement. So Gove has drifted back into political irrelevance. Yes, he's still a cabinet minister, but he doesn't have a role anymore. When Johnson needs to be removed, and Gove will be doing everything he can to hasten that day, what are Gove's credentials going to be? In cabinet terms, he's between roles. So yeah, it makes sense that Gove would be the architect of this scrap. Leak the text, create the conditions for the government to blame Cummings for it, and sit back and watch as they tear each other apart. And that seems to have already started. People are remarking on the headlines in a particular paper today that Boris Johnson allegedly said that he'd rather see the bodies piled high than install a third lockdown. Of course, he did both. An awful lot of debate going on at the moment about whether or not Boris Johnson really said this. Obviously, people who are not fans of Boris Johnson will naturally be inclined to believe he did say it because they'll think, well, it's the sort of thing he would say. It really makes no difference. I mean, what this is, the article doesn't name the source of this quote. Who said that Boris Johnson said this? It's almost certainly Dominic Cummings. Let us be honest here. This is almost certainly a little salvo from Dominic Cummings. We're going to see this go back and forth. We're going to see this happening. And So it makes no difference. In fact, really, it makes no difference whether Johnson said it or not. What actually matters is he did it. He did see the bodies pile high before eventually installing that lockdown too late. But, you know, people were wondering regarding Michael Gove where he actually was last week, because, as I say, he may be the architect of all this. So with the outbreak of all those Dyson leaks, where was Michael Gove? He was a bit quiet. He popped up again at the end of the week as Cummings was tearing into Boris Johnson. So if this is what happened, if this is actually what's going on, Johnson's team haven't half fallen into a trap. And as I say, I'm not saying that Dominic Cummings definitely didn't leak this thing. But he certainly doesn't fancy taking the blame for it. And it would be in Michael Gove's interest for this to have happened. You know, what Johnson's team have done is to poke the sleeping tiger that was Dominic Cummings. Conservative MPs are once again worried about the damage that Johnson's reckless approach to government is having. I saw a quote in The Guardian from an unnamed former cabinet minister who blames Boris Johnson for ever employing Dominic Cummings in the first place. It was obvious to them that he would have been gathering secrets during his time in control of Downing Street and Whitehall to be used as ammunition should it be needed in the future. Dominic Cummings was not doing the work he was doing in government like as an employee of the Conservatives as such, or as an employee of the government. He was doing it for his own purposes. He used the Conservatives to get what he wanted. Conservatives knew this. Conservative MPs knew this. So we don't even have to worry about this quote in The Guardian is really true, or if it's really from a former cabinet minister or who it's from. Makes no difference. We know that this is the sentiment of a lot of Conservative MPs. And, you know, and whether they be more moderate ones or the raging lunatics in the ERG, they didn't like Cummings being so close to Johnson. Many of them publicly said so. The latter group were happy with his work in getting the Brexit referendum results, sure, but they didn't want him interfering in party matters. They didn't want him interfering in government. They didn't like the way that he had a hold over Boris Johnson. He was never one of them. He's even been recorded publicly attacking the Conservatives. He has a complete loathing of Tory MPs, and the feeling has always been mutual. And lest we not forget, Dominic Cummings said he would be happy to appear before a select committee looking at the government's response to the pandemic. Now, he wasn't so willing to appear in front of them in the past over Brexit, for example. He is still technically in contempt of Parliament for refusing to appear before them a few years ago. Oh, he's only too happy now, though. In fact, it's likely he is now relishing the prospect. I'm going to need to clear the decks for when this happens. I think it's May the 26th is when he's appearing. Now, the Times was reporting what Cummings is doing is preparing a dossier that will aim to pin the blame for tens of thousands of deaths squarely on Johnson's shoulders. Shouldn't be too hard because that's actually true. They also quoted an ally of Cummings saying, Dominic has copies of everything and knows where all the bodies are buried. So, we have just over 4 weeks of unofficial press briefings of the sort we've seen today from both sides, you know, trying to gain the upper ground in this battle. The opposition will absolutely need to make capital from all of this. Makes no difference if the headlines that particular day are allegations against Johnson, as today, or Cummings, which it might be tomorrow. Both were instrumental in where we are now. Frankly, if Johnson's advisers know of no other way to deal with Cummings than to double down on their attacks on him, this is going to be a bit spicy, and it's going to be very bruising to both. But of course, Johnson is the one who has the most to lose. Cummings may fear criminal charges, but he is careful, and if he's careful and has been building up explosive secrets to use against Johnson if needed, it may well be a case that if he goes down, he's taking the rest down with him. They surely won't allow that. And if Johnson has nothing to use against Cummings that won't blow up in his own face as well, then Dominic Cummings could prove to be incredibly dangerous for him. I will be honest, I do not understand why Boris Johnson would even try and take Cummings on. He must surely want him on side instead. But as that former minister appeared to be saying, this is on Johnson for ever letting him get close to his operations in the first place. The problem, I suppose, was that Johnson convinced himself that he couldn't manage without Cummings' genius. But Cummings isn't a genius as such, just a canny con man. This row has apparently erupted because Cummings fears that blaming him for the leak is intended to lead to a criminal investigation. After all, whoever leaked these texts has potentially broken the law. If so, then it's easy to see why Cummings is going to come out all guns blazing against this. Nearly a year ago, when Johnson was rallying the entire government in support of Dominic Cummings over the Barnard Castle affair, some wondered why they were defending the man when it was doing such reputational damage. Some thought that Cummings must have some juicy dirt on the lot of them, especially Johnson. Well, looks like we may find out. But if the pressure is ramped up ahead of the Select Committee appearance in a month's time, the Conservative MPs may start getting jittery again, as they did last year when the coronavirus response was spiralling out of control. If Labour can cut through with these revelations, and I think we can expect them to be the focus of the next few weeks' worth of Prime Minister's questions, then the pressure will mount up on Boris Johnson. And now that Johnson has served his primary purpose of winning that general election, ripping us out of the EU, any reputational damage that he appears to be causing the party with his leadership now will be less forgiven. I said last year that when he appeared to be damaging the Conservatives' brand, they stuck by him only because of Brexit. They didn't want a change of leadership because that could have changed the course of Brexit. Also, early on in the parliamentary cycle, you get away with some cock-ups early on because you hope that you can move past them by the time the next general election comes along. You know, the damage will be fixed or forgotten. Indeed, the flip in the polls has shown that. But as 2021 progresses, if Johnson brings more pressure onto himself and his MPs, they'll be a year closer to the next election. And what they think it's worth sticking by him for will change. You know, the closer they get to that elections, if the polls aren't looking so good, at the moment they are, he's fine. As soon as they're not, it's a different matter. Now, the end of May is going to be really interesting times. Will Cummings have the goods on Johnson? Will he really use them? Will Johnson try and cut a deal to mute the worst of Cummings' revelations? If not, and if Cummings does drop an absolute bombshell on the Prime Minister, will Labour capitalise on it? So June could be a really spicy month. It could be very deeply damaging for Boris Johnson, as it was last year, and for the Conservatives, indeed. And then we get into autumn, another coronavirus surge, and that could finish him off. And Gove may well be lapping it all up. But there we are, more to come, no doubt. Until then, those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. Hope you found the video interesting. If you did, don't forget to click the like button. And if you'd like to support the channel further, please also click the Patreon link for details. And until next time, I'll see you later.